Welcome to the ACS Technical Advisory Board podcast series, where we talk all things tech including data, cyber, AI, blockchain, and Internet of Things. Meet your host, Dr. David Cook, Vice President of the Australian Computer Society's Technical Boards. David is a technology advocate dedicated to advances and progression of computing and human-computer interaction. In today's episode, David will be talking with ACS Cyber Security Committee member, Ben DiMarco. Join us as we discuss the communication styles needed for cyber awareness, the value of having an organization such as the ACS supporting you, and how privacy and security can impact a business's ability to function at a high level.
Today, we're talking in cybersecurity and we're talking to Ben DiMarco. Ben is he works for WTW and as a cyber and technology risk expert. And we're going to talk to him a little bit further about what that means in terms of risk and in terms of cybersecurity. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Lovely to be here.
So firstly, tell us why you have joined as one of the cybersecurity committee members and what's your passion there?
So I think the ACS has such an important role to play in the next couple of years. Cyber's left what was traditionally just information security. Now it's in boards, it's in senior management, it's all across the organisation. People need good information, they need the right support, and the ACS is perfectly placed to give that. I'm passionate about education, so I feel very much that this is the right space to help and to support those things.
Is there a particular area of education that you think we need to really rise to the challenge on?
So the biggest difficulty with cyber at the moment is it's become cross-functional. You have to know about the tooling, the endpoints, the controls, but you also need to know about threat actors, you need to know about law and regulation, and more than that, you have to understand risk management. So all of those issues together make it a very complex issue.
Now, most people come to cybersecurity from a technology background, but tell me, how did you come into being such a person in cybersecurity?
So I refer to myself more as a reform lawyer. I started as a litigation lawyer. I then did a lot of insurance law. Probably about 10 years ago, my practice morphed into more technology disputes. From there, I did cyber incident response. And what that means is I've come from probably a light technologist background, but I've seen a lot more of the interplay. So how do you talk about this in the context of what will happen with a threat actor, the way they'll behave? How do you think about the way in which you manage an incident and all the different problems, from business interruption to privacy to issues with stakeholders, breaches of confidentiality and so forth? And what that's given me a huge appreciation for the technology underpinnings, but also a really good understanding of how we need lots and lots of diverse viewpoints and lots of people with different perspectives to manage and to address cyber risk and to improve cyber resilience.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's great that we have, usually we don't like lawyers, but it's great to have one or two on the committee because it helps to break up that sort of technology focus, which sometimes takes away from how we interact with people for the best.
Yeah, and the thing I'll add to that is we see a lot of information that boards will want, C-suite will want, different people will want across the organisation, and the technological underpinning is fundamental, but how we communicate, how we talk about their language, the way in which they think about the legal consequences, sanctions, privacy, notifiable breach obligations, it's intrinsic in what we need to ultimately do to help an organisation through a cyber event. So I think adding that perspective is really useful for people with my background, but also people that sit at the coalface and are trying to manage these cyber incidents so they get that perspective.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that because, I mean, the ACS is profoundly about professionalism, and I mean capital P professionalism, which is what I like hearing about work on, on C-suite and on other boards and committees and so on, to really raise that awareness and concentrated interaction to try and help not just an individual, but beyond the normal remit that we might otherwise talk to.
And even more powerfully than that, those groups are looking for this information. They want support. They want the ACS to be driving things, to be helping their members, but also to be part of the problem that they've got because there's so much information asymmetry. Boards get so much bad advice on this and they get so much conflicted advice that a group that actually thinks about the technology, that thinks about what their members are doing is really, really powerful and really useful.
So leading on from there, so obviously we're part of the Australian Computer Society. What's the biggest issue now in terms of the challenge for ACS members? How do we get them more involved into the cybersecurity, and what more do we need to do?
I'll give you 3 issues that I think members are going to have to be focused on and is also going to be very important for them in their journey. So the first thing is information security is becoming a bedrock for lots and lots of different problems. I think privacy is a really interesting thing because 4 or 5 years ago, we talked about privacy more as just a governance process. Did I do a privacy impact assessment? Did I understand data flows? But what you see now is whether it's kind of what's happening with the Medibank dispute, some of the other issues that our regulators taken up, it's focusing granularly on the information security strategy that the organisation had. Did they have in place the right EDR? Did they have in place the right monitoring? How were they actioning issues that came up through penetration testing or auditing? So information security is a bedrock to not just that pure issue of protecting the organisation from a malicious intruder, but also how do we think about privacy compliance? How do we think about technology risk and technology resilience? The other two I'll mention very, very quickly is that if you look at what's happened with cyber right now, we know now a catastrophic cyber event will cause a lot of business interruption. And the data shows that essentially if you're out for more than 4 weeks, it kind of doubles week on week on week. And because of that, you've got this huge balance sheet impact that sits across organizations. And what that means is what we do across resilience, what we do across recovery, has got a huge impact, not just for that team and for the people that are at the coalface and the technologists, but also for all those other business units. The last thing I'll mention too is that cyber is becoming much more of a cross-functional problem within businesses. And a lot of the organizations we work with, we get them to put together steering committees quite early on. And so you want people that sit within operations sides, you want people that are using key assets or key systems, you want HR and other people together. And what they ultimately need is they need that guidance from the information security team to not just talk about how they've done tooling or how they're doing demarcation or things like that, but also what does it mean for the different parts of the organization? What's the business impact? What are some of the consequences? So because of that, you've got this really important seat at the table that I think members within the ACS are going to need to take up to ultimately help their organizations.
I guess the other aspect that comes about with everything you just mentioned there is the uncertainty, I guess, the lack of trust across all of these things. So, and there's no more concerning part for me than the issue of maturity in terms of that. So, could you talk about that? What do we need to do in terms of changing the profile of our own sense of maturity in cybersecurity?
So I see it as two main challenges. One of the problems that you've got is cyber's always had a bit of a self-assessment component to it. And when you do that, or when you look at third parties that might be assessing you in terms of a NIST framework or an ISO framework, there's a fair bit of variance in terms of how you look at some of these things. Cyber will always be subjective, but sometimes you see these situations of people gilding the lily a little bit and maybe trying to be a little bit more rose tinted than what they ultimately need to be. And sometimes we've got to have more honest discussions within organizations. I've seen this with some of my clients where their view is, hey, we were a 2.5 under in this framework last year. Why aren't we 2.7? Why aren't we 2.8 now? And what often gets lost in the discussion is the cyber threat landscape changes all the time. You can't just say, I was here this year and suddenly I'm going to be better or I'm going to be the same next year. So some of that nuance and some of that actual reality of what we're trying to do is important. The second thing I think for members and also some of the issues that they've got to really address is we can be a little bit siloed sometimes within the cyberspace. Malicious actors are always trying to find new techniques. They're trying to find new ways of breaking systems. IT change management, particularly with Gen AI, is creating all of these new types of vulnerabilities. And part of, I think, what we've got to do is we've got to actually be honest with ourselves around the fact that there are going to be a lot of challenges within organizations. There's going to be a lot of difficulty year on year for how we're thinking about budgeting and how we're thinking about investments. And part of having that is having a really open, honest, and robust discussion internally. And that sometimes can be missing. Sometimes we try and be a little bit too positive with the messages that we're giving off and how well we're trying to communicate in terms of what the organization's doing.
I wonder if you can answer this question for me. There's sort of an undercurrent of themes about NIST and ISO 27000. Some people are treating it as a sort of a tick box event where you just tick the box and we've got that. Some people are doing self-ratings, self-auditing. We're NIST 2.8. And who did you get to audit you to come to that conclusion? Oh, yeah, we worked it out ourselves. Is there room for us to sharpen this up so that NIST or ISO 27 becomes a little bit more, relevant in terms of, if we're really going to be serious about cybersecurity, or is it okay the way it is?
Yeah, so I've got an interesting perspective because I work with some committees around Standards Australia and I've got some contacts that sit within the NIST ecosystem. And one of the things they will say is that they want to give you a bedrock, they want to give you the tooling, but if they get too prescriptive, you lose some of the nuance because each organization has a different IT environment. If I'm very operational technology heavy, it's kind of a completely different risk profile to if I'm just an office block somewhere. So the standards themselves always need nuance, but I think one of the questions that you often have to ask is, are you using the standards as a general risk assessment tool, or are you using it as a pay-to-play? And this, I think, is one of the problems we've got right now. So if I'm a financial services large provider and if I'm thinking about my contractual supply chain, I want them to be SOC 2, I want them to be ISO and so forth. So we see it more as I need this bit of paper so that I can keep doing my business and so that I'll keep having the relationships with some of these key clients and suppliers. And that's one issue, which I think is we're stuck with right now. But the second issue that you've raised is if I'm looking at it from genuine risk management perspective, what do I need to do? What do I ultimately need to essentially have that gives me the certainty and also gives me the level of precision? And there's a live question about whether ISO and NIST can do it. And also some organizations are talking about, do we have something that's more externally facing and then something that's more for our own internal consumption? So they're live issues that I agree with you have to be resolved.
And I think one of the other aspects is I see a lot of corporations who are simply looking to reduce their insurance costs, and so they're looking for what's the cheapest, quickest thing that we can do right now that will reduce that. So they're often looking for the quick out, the quick tick box, perhaps not necessarily always the tick box. People will tend to take ISO standards a little bit more seriously because they understand there's an ongoing commitment. But this issue of auditing, it comes up all the time, and the number of people who are clearly just looking for a cheap insurance premium.
I'm really pleased you raised that because this is one of the disservices we've done in the industry. This idea that if you go through a NIST or an ISO process, your insurance drops XYZ%, it's completely misguided. Insurers build controls based on the breaches that they see. There's a huge amount of variance in terms of what they want to see and what the standards want to see. And I have to have this discussion with organizations. Can I show an ROI if I do this that'll make my insurance premium cheaper? It never will. Firstly, the premiums aren't as expensive as what people think they are. But also, insurers don't care if you're ISO or if you're NIST. They just want to know, how did you answer the controls that they're really worried about? And what does that mean for their underwriting rating process and their rating engine?
Ben DiMarco, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
To find out more about how the ACS is powering Australia's technology brilliance, visit us at our website, Facebook or LinkedIn. Want to get involved with the ACS technical boards? Email us at tab@acs.org.au and tell us a bit about yourself. Join us for more thought leadership, ideas, and information through our other podcasts on the ACS YouTube, Facebook, or on LinkedIn.